Hello everyone, welcome to the episode that deals with another important concept of functional English, that is the active and passive voice. To make the learners understand the topic scrupulously, we'll discuss the meaning, rules and uses of active and passive voice comprehensively. I'm Sumedha Verma and our subject expert for today's topic is Mrs. Sabah Tariq, lecturer for English at the University of Jizan, Saudi Arabia. After watching this episode, the student will be able to understand accurate meaning and importance of active and passive voice, the important rules for changing active voice into passive voice and vice versa. And it will help to expand and improve the skills of speaking and writing English correctly. Now, what is active and passive voice? Voice is that form of a verb which tells whether the subject does something or something is done to the subject. A verb is in the active voice when its form tells us that the subject does the action. It is in the passive voice when its form tells us that the action of the verb is done to the subject. In the active voice, the subject is active and the prominence is given to the subject. In the passive voice, the object in the active voice is made the subject and given prominence. Now let's look at the two examples. The first is, he writes a letter. The second is, a letter is written by him. In a sentence 1, it's the subject he that does something. So the verb writes is in active voice. In sentence 2, something is done to the subject, a letter. So the verb written is in passive voice. Now read these sentences. Mohan likes tea. The subject is Mohan and object is tea. The tea is liked by Mohan. Here subject tea and the object is Mohan. So we see that in active voice, Mohan is the subject of the transitive verb. Tea is the object of the transitive verb. But in the passive voice, tea is the subject of the transitive verb and Mohan is the object of the verb. Thus, we conclude that when a verb is changed from active to passive voice, the object of the transitive verb in the active voice becomes the subject of the transitive verb in the passive voice. So here we have to note that only transitive verbs have a passive voice as they have an object. Intransitive verbs cannot have passive voice as they don't have an object at all. Now, why do we resort to passive voice? When we need to focus on the person or thing affected by an action, which is the object of an active form of the verb, we make that person or thing the subject of the passive form of the verb. John has scored a goal. That's an active form. A goal has been scored by John. That's a passive form. Here we have to decide whether we want to talk about John or the goal. Passive voice is generally resorted to when the person or thing responsible for the action is less prominent or is vague, unknown or indefinite. He has been killed. The result was declared. The facts must be known. The convict must be executed. Order should be obeyed. The active voice in the above cases would involve the use of definite agents or subjects like somebody, they, people, we, you, one, etc. Somebody has killed him. They declare the result. We must know the facts. They will execute the convict. You should obey the orders. As the agent in the above sentences is not prominent, we don't need to mention it. Now let's look at some more examples. The principal read the report. The report was read by the principal. There is practically no difference in the meaning or idea expressed by the two sentences, but this is not always so. Often the active voice and the passive voice express a difference in emphasis. Look at these two sentences. The panchayat dug a well to provide water to the village. A well was dug to provide water to the village. Here, we would prefer to use the second rather than the first sentence, because what we want to refer to is not the action, namely a well being provided in order to supply water to the village. Now, who dug the well is not important or is not the main idea on our minds. In other words, we are interested in the particular happening, not in anyone's action. So, we would use the passive voice here. Here are some more examples of contexts in which the passive voice is preferred. A bridge was built across the river. Now, who built it is not important. A mistake was made in totaling the marks. Who made the mistake is not our concern here, but only the occurrence of the mistake. Term fees should be paid before the 15th of this month. Now, this is an order expressed impersonally. Now, compare this with you should pay your term fees before the 15th of this month. Here, in all the above sentences, passive voice gives more apt and clear meaning and so is preferred in the sentences. Since the passive voice sounds impersonal, it's used in preference to the active voice in describing scientific or technical processes. For example, common salt is collected from the sea. Seawater is collected in salt pans. It is allowed to evaporate in the sun. As a result, salt crystals are formed at the bottom. They are removed and dried in the sun. As a result, salt crystals are formed at the bottom. They are removed and dried in the sun. Now let's look at some more examples. The results were published last week. The new books were placed on a separate shelf. Rice is grown in many parts of the world. You will notice that the italicized adverbials in the sentences above are necessary to complete the meaning of the sentences. Now look at these sentences. The electric bulb was invented by Edison. Hamlet was written by William Shakespeare. The tiger was killed by a shepherd boy. You will notice that the by plus agent phrase in the sentences above are necessary to complete the meaning of the sentences. Hence, they are used in these sentences. If the by plus agent phrase is not needed for completing the meaning, it's not used. For example, we say that the house was sold for 35,000 by its owner. The places of subject and object in sentence are interchanged in passive voice. Third form of verb, that's past participle, will be used only as main verb in passive voice. Auxiliary verbs for each tense are given below in the table. Present simple tense, that is passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice, am, is, are. Active voice. He sings a song. He does not sing a song. Does he sing a song? Passive voice. A song is sung by him. A song is not sung by him. Is a song sung by him? Present continuous tense, that is passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice, am, being, is being, are being. Active voice. I am writing a letter. I am not writing a letter. Am I writing a letter? Now the passive voice is, a letter is being written by me. A letter is not being written by me. Is a letter being written by me? Present perfect tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice, has been, have been. Active voice. She has finished her work. She has not finished her work. Has she finished her work? Now the passive voice. Her work has been finished by her. Her work has not been finished by her. Has her work been finished by her? Past simple tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice, was or were. Active voice, I killed a snake. I did not kill a snake. Did I kill a snake? Passive voice. A snake was killed by me. A snake was not killed by me. Was a snake killed by me? Past continuous tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice. Was being or were being. Active voice. He was driving a car. He was not driving a car. Was he driving a car? Passive voice. A car was being driven by him. A car was not being driven by him. Was a car being driven by him? Past perfect tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice. Had been. Active voice. They had completed the assignment. They had not completed the assignment. Had they completed the assignment? Passive voice. The assignment had been completed by them. The assignment had not been completed by them. Had the assignment been completed by them? Future simple tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice will be. Active voice. She will buy a car. She will not buy a car. Will she buy a car? Passive voice. A car will be bought by her. A car will not be bought by her. Will a car be bought by her? Future perfect tense in passive voice. Auxiliary verb in passive voice will have been. Active voice. You will have started the job. You will have not started the job. Will you have started the job? Passive voice. The job will have been started by you. The job will not have been started by you. Will the job have been started by you? Now here we have to note the following tenses cannot be changed into passive voice. First is present perfect continuous tense. Second is past perfect continuous tense. Third is future continuous tense. Fourth is future perfect continuous tense. And fifth is sentence having intransitive verbs. Fundamental rules. The places of subject and object in sentence are interchanged in passive voice. Third form of the verb, that's past participle, will be used only as main verb in passive voice. Auxiliary verbs for each tense are given below in the table. Passive voice for present or future modals. Can, may, might, should, must and ought to. The places of subject and object in sentence are interchanged in passive voice. Third form of the verb, that's past participle, will be used only as main verb in passive voice. Now to change sentences having present or future modal into passive voice, auxiliary verb be is added after modal in sentence. Passive voice for present or future modals. Can, may, might, should, must and ought to. Auxiliary verb in passive voice be. Active voice. Can. She can play a violin. She cannot play a violin. Can she play a violin? Passive voice can be. A violin can be played by her. A violin cannot be played by her. Can a violin be played by her? Active voice may. I may buy a computer. I may not buy a computer. May I buy a computer? Active voice may be. A computer may be bought by me. A computer may not be bought by me. May a computer be bought by me? Active voice might. Guests might play chess. Guests might not play chess. Active voice might be. Chess might be played by guests. Chess might not be played by guests. Active voice should. Students should read all chapters. Students should not read all chapters. Should students read all chapters? Active voice should be. All chapters should be read by students. All chapters should not be read by students. Should all chapters be read by students? Active voice must. You must learn the test-taking strategies. You must not learn the test-taking strategies. Active voice must be. Test-taking strategies must be learned by you. Test-taking strategies must not be learned by you. Active voice ought to. They ought to take the examination. Active voice ought to be. The examination ought to be taken by them. Passive voice for past modals: may have, might have, should have, must have, and ought to have. The places of subject and object in sentence are interchanged in passive voice. Third form of the verb, past participle, will be used only as main verb in passive voice. To change sentences having past modal into passive voice, auxiliary verb been is added after modal in sentence. Passive voice for present or future modals: may have, might have, should have, must have, and ought have to. Auxiliary verb in passive voice: been. Active voice: may have. You may have availed the opportunity. You may not have availed the opportunity. Active voice: may have been. The opportunity may have been availed by you. The opportunity may not have been availed by you. Active voice: might have. He might have eaten meal. He might not have eaten meal. Active voice: might have been. Meal might have been eaten by him. Meal might not have been eaten by him. Active voice: should have. You should have read the book. You should not have read the book. Active voice: should have been. The book should have been read by you. The book should not have been read by you. Active voice: must have. He must have started the job. He must not have started the job. Active voice: must have been. The job must have been started by him. The job must not have been started by him. Active voice: ought to have. You ought to have helped him. Active voice: ought to have been. He ought to have been helped by you. Passive voice of imperative sentences: command and request. A sentence which expresses command or request or advice is called imperative sentence. For example, open the door, turn off the television, learn your lesson. For changing these sentences into passive voice, auxiliary verb be is used. The word let is added before sentence in passive voice. Auxiliary verb be is added after object in sentence in passive voice. Main verb, that's the base form of imperative sentence, is changed to third form of the verb, past participle, in passive voice. To understand better, read the following sentences. Passive voice of imperative sentences. Active voice, passive voice: open the door, let the door be opened. Complete the work, let the work be completed. Turn off the television, let the television be turned off. Learn your lesson, let your lesson be learned. Kill the snake, let the snake be killed. Punish him, let him be punished. Speak the truth, let the truth be spoken. Help the poor, let the poor be helped. Revise your book, let your book be revised. Clean your room, let your room be cleaned. Sentences which cannot be changed into passive voice: transitive and intransitive verb. A verb can be either transitive or intransitive. A transitive verb needs an object in sentence to give complete meaning, while intransitive verb does not need an object in sentence to give complete meaning. Transitive verb: he sent a letter. Send is a transitive verb and it needs an object, that is, letter, to express full meaning. Intransitive verb: he laughs. Now here, laugh is an intransitive verb and it does not need object for expressing full meaning. For example, sleep, go, reach, sit, die. These are examples of intransitive verbs. The sentences having intransitive verbs belonging to any tense cannot be changed into passive voice. The reason is that there is not any object in such sentences, and without object of sentence, passive voice is not possible. A sentence can be changed into passive voice if it has subject and object. Sometimes subject may not be written in passive voice, but it does not mean that it has no subject. Such sentences have subject, but the subject is so common or familiar or known that if even it is not written in passive voice, it gives full meaning. For example, cloth is sold in yards. Verbs with two objects. Sometimes there are two objects in the active voice, a direct object and an indirect object. Either of these objects can become the subject of the passive verb. Generally, the object occurring first in the active voice is preferred as the subject of the passive voice. The indirect object denotes the person to whom or for whom something is given or done, while a direct generally denotes the thing. Now look at these examples below. The police gave him a reward of ₹1,000. Mr. Kumar taught us English. Each of these sentences has two objects, the indirect object him or us and the direct object a reward of ₹1,000 or English. Now these sentences can be rewritten in the passive voice, making either the direct or the indirect object the subject and retaining the other object. A. He was given a reward of ₹1,000 by the police. B. A reward of ₹1,000 was given him by the police. C. A reward of ₹1,000 was given to him by the police. A. We were taught English by Mr. Kumar. B. English was taught us by Mr. Kumar. C. English was taught to us by Mr. Kumar. The sentences marked as A above read more natural and hence they are more commonly used. That is, it is more common to make the indirect, that is him, us in the two sentences above, the subject of the sentence in the passive voice. Now let's look at some more examples. The teacher was satisfied with Pooja's performance. Mathur is interested in gardening. I am disgusted with his behavior. We were surprised at the news. Verbs such as the ones in these sentences take other prepositions such as with, in and at instead of by. It should be remembered by the learners that using an active voice adds impact to the writing. This is why most writers use the active voice. Sentences written in an active voice flow better and are easier to understand. It is usually the subject of the sentence which is performing the action. For example, sentences like I really love this dog and the monkeys live in the jungle are easy to understand, while sentences using a passive voice are often hard to understand. Passive voice can make a sentence awkward and vague. The emphasis changes to the receiver of the action. Examples are, the pie was eaten by Tony. Tom is loved by Alice. Passive sentences usually have more words than active ones, which is one reason the reader has to work harder to get at the meaning. If you have a composition that is too wordy, you may be able to change some of the passive sentences to active ones. Two examples are here. The ballots were counted by the volunteers. The volunteers counted the ballots. The flowers were trampled by the dog. The dog trampled the flowers. Learners should also remember that while an active voice adds impact to the writing, however, sometimes passive voice is needed to lessen the impact of the sentence in some situations. For example, sometimes it is used to deliberately obscure who is responsible for an action. Like if a politician said, mistakes were made or shots were fired. Businesses may use the passive voice to lessen their impact, like your service will be shut off, which is passive, rather than we are going to shut off your service, which is active. In crime reports, a policeman would write, the bank was robbed, because he does not know who robbed the bank. In a mystery novel, you may want to place the emphasis on what was taken, like the jewels were taken, rather than focusing on the unknown person who took them. So the conclusion is, in this episode, we talked about the meaning of active and passive voice, rules of changing active voice to passive voice, and also the importance of active and passive voice. We anticipate that after watching this episode, the students will be able to use active and passive voice properly. We also hope that after observing all the above mentioned points, they'll be able to use active and passive voice without any difficulties and errors. That is all we have for you today. We hope you enjoyed this session. See you in the next episode, in which we'll talk about modals and their uses in the sentences. Till then, thank you and namaskar.